Can you talk about why we care about what's happening in Africa right now? I mean, what if you tell the American taxpayer, why are we there? Why are we spending the money we're spending there?
Thanks for the question, Senator. For access and influence, I think at the accelerated pace, Russian Federation is really trying to take over Central Africa as well as the Sahel.
So, the U.S. general claims that Russia is attempting to take over Africa, and the U.S. wants to safeguard Africa with its military bases. But why did Russia intervene in the first place? Why does the U.S. consistently overlook the fact that Africa is inviting Russia in to counter U.S. influence? Africa seeks to protect itself from U.S. exploitation and control by engaging with partners who believe in mutual benefits, such as Russia and China. However, U.S. envy prompts the general to speak about controlling Africa in front of the world. Have they even consulted Africa to determine if their presence is desired or necessary? Let's find out. The U.S. general has openly admitted plans that the U.S. made to go against Africa. He tells why the U.S. has military bases in Africa, against Africa's will. This shows how common it is for them to ignore what Africa demands. Even if Africa demands independence from the U.S.'s exploitation and military bases, the U.S. is not ready to give it. After what the U.S. general has to say, everything becomes very clear. It all started with him showing concern for African nations.
Houthi attacks in the Red Sea directly impact the lives of millions of Africans. Terrorism, poverty, food insecurity, climate change, and mass migration shatter African lives. These factors sow the seeds of violent extremism and Russian exploitation across entire regions of the continent.
By referencing conflicts such as the Russian Federation's war in Ukraine and the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, the speaker implies that these events are not isolated incidents, but rather have broader implications for regions beyond where they directly occur. The mention of the Russian Federation's war in Ukraine suggests that the speaker recognizes the potential for conflicts outside of Africa to have ripple effects on the continent. This war has been a significant geopolitical event with implications for global security and stability, and its repercussions can extend to regions far beyond Europe. Similarly, the reference to Houthi attacks in the Red Sea highlights the idea that events in the Middle East can reverberate across maritime routes and impact African nations that rely on these routes for trade and transportation. The Red Sea is a crucial maritime corridor for international trade, and any disruptions in this area can have economic consequences for countries with access to it. So, according to the U.S. general, all these reasons make the U.S. eligible to interfere in African matters.
AFRICOM's campaign revolves around central themes of ensuring strategic access, countering threats to the homeland and U.S. interests, preparing for and responding to crisis, and lastly, bolstering our allies and partners. This campaign places our African partners at the center, achieving positive change by executing African-led and U.S.-enabled operations focused on our shared objectives.
He admits the United States maintains access to key African regions and resources. It could involve diplomatic efforts to secure favorable relationships with African governments and military and economic initiatives to safeguard strategic interests in the region. It aims to show commitment to addressing various security threats in Africa, including terrorism, insurgency, transnational crime, and illicit trafficking. The United States deploys military, intelligence, and law enforcement resources to counter these threats and prevent them from destabilizing the region. This objective indicates a readiness to respond swiftly and effectively to crises in Africa. Crises could range from natural disasters and humanitarian emergencies to political conflicts and mass violence. The United States may provide humanitarian aid, peacekeeping support, diplomatic mediation, or military intervention to address these crises and mitigate their impact on regional stability. While he justified U.S. involvement in Africa, he also showed how the U.S. is jealous of Russia and African ties. But obviously, it can't be said loudly. So, this is how it goes.
General Langley, can you talk about why we care about what's happening in Africa right now? I mean, if you tell the American taxpayer, why are we there? Why are we spending the money we're spending there?
Thanks for the question, Senator. For access and influence, I'd say that a number of countries are at the tipping point of actually being captured by the Russian Federation, as they are spreading some of their false narratives across Libya. And from a strategic answer piece, access influence across the whole Maghreb, that is NATO's southern flank. We need to be able to maintain access and influence across the Maghreb from Morocco all the way to Libya. The PRC and Russia are also remaining exploitative where possible and coercive when necessary. They want that ground. They want power projection capabilities. So for the most part, the rest of the continent is also for mining concessions, whether it be gold or rare earth minerals. Both of them have a long-range plan. But I think at the accelerated pace, the Russian Federation is really trying to take over Central Africa as well as the Sahel.
One of the primary U.S. concerns regarding Russian influence is its dissemination of false narratives. By spreading misinformation or propaganda, Russia may seek to shape public opinion and manipulate perceptions in its favor. The reference to false narratives across Libya highlights Russia's attempts to influence the narrative in that region, potentially to advance its strategic interests or undermine its adversaries. The mention of Russian influence highlights the broader geopolitical competition and power struggles in Africa and beyond. According to the U.S., as major global powers vie for influence and control, countries like Russia may employ various tactics, including information warfare, to advance their geopolitical agendas and expand their sphere of influence. But it is simply jealous of the U.S. being kicked out and Russia entering the game. But again, this was said to justify how the U.S. can easily interfere in Africa, and Africa should have no issue. The speaker highlights the strategic significance of maintaining access and influence across the Mediterranean region and Europe's southern flank, extending from Morocco to Libya. This indicates a recognition of the broader geopolitical dynamics at play in the region and the need to counter Russian influence to maintain stability and security. By emphasizing the importance of strategic access and influence, the speaker signals a commitment to protecting vital interests and preserving the balance of power in the Mediterranean and adjacent areas. The exploitative and coercive tactics employed by the People's Republic of China, the PRC, and Russia to secure ground and power projection capabilities were discussed. The speaker mentions the pursuit of mining concessions, including for gold and rare minerals, as a motivation behind the actions of the Russian Federation and other global powers. This suggests economic interests driving their activities in these regions. But what is driving the U.S. to control Africa? That was left unsaid. Also, the Russian Federation's accelerated pace of attempting to extend its influence into Central Africa and the Sahel region was specifically mentioned. This indicates a perceived urgency or increased activity in these areas. He also talked about the significant influence of the Russian Federation's narrative, which has often drowned out the U.S. government's efforts in the past years. Specifically, it mentions how the Russian Federation, including through entities like the Wagner Group, has contributed to instability across the Sahel region through misinformation and disinformation campaigns.
Chairman, thanks for that question, because I would say the Russian Federation's narrative drowned out the U.S. government's in the past years. They were accelerant. The Russian Federation, not just through Wagner, stoked a lot of the instability across the Sahel. They did this through misinformation, disinformation campaigns. So I see how we could double down in our efforts is through our own information campaign, but matched with our assurance efforts across the whole of government. Just not building military and security capacity, but all the story needs to be told about the successes of USAID and State Department collectively in all of our operations, activities, and investments.
The speakers discussed the importance of doubling down on efforts to counter these narratives through information campaigns. This involves efforts to inform governments and the general public about the danger such groups and entities pose. By highlighting the successes of the USAID, the United States Agency for International Development, and the State Department in various operations, activities, and investments, they aim to counter the false narratives propagated by these groups. The speakers stressed the need for additional resources to support these information operations effectively. This includes supplemental and regular appropriations to ensure timely and sustained efforts in countering misinformation and disinformation campaigns. But in simple words, it all showed how the US is a good fit for Africa and how Russia wants to exploit Africa. But let's not forget why Africa is aligning with Russia in the first place. Africa is tired of the exploitation done by the US. The general is even accepting how the US aims to interfere in Africa. Have they asked Africa if they need any help? They think they can do whatever they want with Africa. But that is not the truth.
I really appreciated both of you talking about a whole of government approach that you're doing in your areas of responsibility, because as you point out, there isn't a military solution in these countries. And I wanted to show this map. You can see by the pins where we do not have ambassadors in Africa.
You must be thinking about why the importance of ambassadors is being highlighted. Ambassadors are responsible for advancing U.S. objectives in their respective countries. These may include promoting democracy, human rights, economic interests, and security cooperation. Ambassadors engage in diplomacy, public outreach, and strategic initiatives to achieve these goals effectively. Ambassadors serve as cultural and political liaisons, fostering understanding and cooperation between the United States and the host country. They engage with local leaders, civil society groups, and the general public to build relationships and promote mutual understanding. Having ambassadors in Africa will help the U.S. better control Africa. But this was presented to look like the U.S. cares about a whole-of-government approach, indicating that there isn't solely a military solution to the challenges faced in these countries. Having ambassadors present reinforces the comprehensive approach taken by the U.S. government in addressing various issues, including security and stability.
Senator, it's very essential that we have, especially with our whole of government approach. Our African partners understand that we're here to help them reach their overall national goals of stability and security. But when we bring our assurance actions and our African campaign plan and say 3D, they said, okay, then why aren't we important enough to have an ambassador?
However, the mention of Russia and China has also not been forgotten here.
So it does draw a strategic communication that can be exploited and leveraged by the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China. It is certainly essential.
Again, bringing this back to Russia and China and saying that the absence of ambassadors can potentially be exploited and leveraged by other global powers is just a way to assure the U.S. that it does not want to do it. However, it has become evident that the United States is keen on persuading Africa to view Russia unfavorably. The underlying motive seems to be to reclaim influence over the continent. However, African nations are not oblivious to the intentions behind these efforts. It appears that the United States is attempting to assert control and exploit African resources once again. This agenda is met with skepticism and resistance from African leaders and citizens alike. The rhetoric employed by the United States hints at a strategic move to regain African power dynamics. Yet, African nations remain wary of falling into old patterns of exploitation and manipulation. Africa is asserting its independence and sovereignty, refusing to be swayed by external influences, seeking to dictate its alliances and policies. The continent's resolve to chart its course and protect its interests is palpable. Do you think the U.S. should say anything about controlling Africa without Africa's consent? Why does the U.S. not understand that Africa has the right to be self-dependent? Let us know in the comment section why you think Russia and China were highlighted repeatedly. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: African politics, economy, and increasing power. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.
Tell us what you think in the comment section. Like and share the video, and subscribe so that you don't miss any of our African videos. It's the best way to support us.